workplace, but I need to know about how people are applying technology especially. You get behind the pictures and get into what are the real issues and what is a potential solution to the problem. And that's why I watch it.
Sometime before recorded history on the Pacific Northwest coast, a devastating earthquake may have sent damaging tremors as far inland as Portland. Join us for a half-hour examination of the earthquake threat in the Pacific Northwest, Thursday night at 8:30 on Oregon Field Guide.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by ODS Health Plan, the group medical plan that meets the needs of more than 600,000 Oregonians by providing a broad range of medical and dental coverage and responsive service.
Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Roger Mudd in Washington. After the news summary, we go first to the Senate Finance Committee's agreement on the budget. Then concern about the safety of Pepsi-Cola. Next, Jeff Kay looks at the changing nature of the workforce and a newsmaker interview with Strobe Talbot, the State Department's policy coordinator with the former Soviet Union.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour.
A tentative agreement this afternoon on changes in the president's budget plan. According to the Associated Press, they will set aside the president's so-called BTU energy tax in favor of a 4-cent per gallon tax on gasoline and diesel fuel. The new proposal would make up the lost revenue by cutting mainly Medicare. The full committee is due to vote on the plan by the end of the week. President Clinton said this morning that whatever comes out of the committee, he expects Congress to meet his goal of $500 billion in deficit reduction over 5 years. He spoke at a news conference in the White House Rose Garden with the president of Namibia.
Let me make it clear. The actual plan, I believe, the House passed was $496 billion. You know, if it were 497, 498, 495, you know, if it's something in that range, that's not. But if, you know, it's considerably below that, I think that would be a mistake. But I have no reason to believe the Senate is going well below that, and I certainly have no reason to believe that the conference report, that is the final bill on the economic plan, would go well below it.
The Senate committee version of the bill was criticized by Republicans who don't want any tax increases and by House liberals who oppose the additional cuts in social programs and also feel the president pulled the rug out from under them by abandoning the BTU tax after they had voted for it. Congressman Kwesi Mfume of Maryland is chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. Congressman Newt Gingrich of Georgia is part of the House Republican leadership.
If you are a normal working American in the suburbs or in rural America and you drive, the idea that we're not going to punish Exxon with the BTU tax, but we are going to punish you every time you drive your car is not going to come across as any big breakthrough.
We took a tremendous step backwards here in the House and worked very hard at trying to fashion a compromise. Some of us swallowed hard and bit our teeth, but were prepared to work and to fashion a bill. We took that step backwards in order that we might be able to take 2 steps forward. And so when there were already cuts, major cuts in entitlements and cuts elsewhere, it does not, to us at least, make very much sense now to be prepared to vote for more cuts.
The House passed a $9.3 billion foreign aid bill today. It includes $904 million for Russia and other republics of the former Soviet Union. And the Senate broke a deadlock on the campaign reform bill today by approving a compromise on public financing of congressional elections. Moderate Republicans joined Democratic senators to end a Republican filibuster. The way is now clear for a final vote on the bill. Robin?
The Commerce Department reported that construction of new homes rose 2.4% in May. The increase put housing starts at their highest level in 5 months. Construction activity was strongest in the Midwest and South. The government also reported industrial production grew by 0.2% last month. It was the 8th straight monthly rise in output at the nation's factories, mines, and utilities.
Relief agencies resumed distributing food today in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. The aid operations were halted a week ago after Somali militia attacked United Nations peacekeepers, killing 23 of them. We have more in this report narrated by David Simmons of Worldwide Television News.
The first food to roll out of Mogadishu port since UN peacekeepers took up heavy weapons against the Somali warlords. Those in the capital were the first to receive the aid, a clear signal that the UN is back in business as a relief organization. Private agencies are also planning to rejoin the effort. The UN delivered 30 tons of food during the day, but many people in Somalia complained about its quality. They said it's too old, too dry. Once it's been divided among the families, as so often happens in Mogadishu, the rest is taken to the markets to be sold or bartered. Warlord General Mohammed Aidid may be down, but he's not out, and supporters gathered to denounce the United Nations. 3 nights of punitive UN attacks left them angry, bewildered. Without the support of the Somali people, the relief effort will remain a dangerous business. Relief agencies have been briefed on the dangers, and the United Nations has promised to finish the job it started 7 months ago.
President Clinton said today the goal of the U.S. airstrikes was to restore peace in Somalia and allow the United Nations to get back to the business of rebuilding the country. At his news conference, he was asked if the airstrikes had resulted in something of a public relations disaster for the United States.
I don't know that it is that. It may be, the issue is whether the Pakistani soldiers erred, and that's for the United Nations to resolve. And I'm sure that it will, but you can't have these kinds of conflicts and expect them to be brutal and illegal on one side, and then have a response and expect that there will be nothing controversial about it. That is not to exonerate or to condemn. The United Nations is looking into the Pakistani conduct. There are, I must tell you, conflicting allegations about what occurred and who was actually responsible for the deaths of all the civilians there, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
A Pentagon spokesman said today a Marine amphibious force had been ordered to sail toward Mogadishu. A group of 4 ships had been engaged in military exercises in the Persian Gulf. On board are 4,200 sailors and Marines. Defense officials said the movement was precautionary.
A congressional report released today says Jordan supplied Iraq with military spare parts, U.S. technology, and Allied intelligence information during the Gulf War. The report cites newly declassified government documents. It also says the Bush administration was aware that Jordan was violating international trade sanctions against Iraq at a time when administration officials were telling Congress Jordan was in compliance. Jordan's King Hussein will be in Washington later this week for talks with President Clinton. That's our summary of the news top stories. Now it's on to the latest on the tax bill, the Pepsi tamperings, changes in the workforce, and U.S. relations with Russia. First tonight, we look at today's agreement by Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee to modify President Clinton's budget package. The committee has been meeting all week, considering a new energy tax and revised spending cuts. Many of those details have been circulating today on Capitol Hill, and here to tell us where things stand now is Alan Murray, the Deputy Washington Bureau Chief of the Wall Street Journal. Alan, it is definite the Democrats have a deal?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I guess the way to put it is that the cement is still a little bit wet. They seem to be fiddling around the edges. Roger mentioned, for instance, that they were talking about a 4-cent a gallon gas tax. In fact, they've adjusted that to a 4.3 cent a gallon gas tax. But generally, they seem to have a deal.
Now, that means Senator Boren, who was the sort of Democratic holdout, is also with the other Democrats on the Finance Committee, so this package can go through the Finance Committee.
The point of this exercise has been to get a package that would get a unanimous Democratic vote in the committee so that the Democrats could push it through, and that seems to be what they have.
And what about with the rest of the Democrats in the full Senate?
Oh, they're going to have some big fights on the floor of the Senate. One of the things they did, for instance, was to increase the cuts in the Medicare program for the elderly by about $20 billion over 5 years. There are a lot of senators, liberal senators, who don't particularly like that and who are going to fight it on the floor of the Senate.
I see. Okay, now let's look at the package in detail. Let's start with the energy tax. What is going to substitute for what President Clinton had originally, a BTU tax?
President Clinton's tax was very broad-based, hit all forms of energy. In its place, you have a narrow gasoline tax, 4.3 cents a gallon, raises a lot less revenue. To raise as much revenue as President Clinton's plan would have raised, you would have had to have a 25 or 30 cent a gallon gas tax.
So how much will this raise instead of the $72 billion?
This will raise about $23 billion over the next 5 years.
So where do they raise the rest of the money to make up for what the BTU tax would have raised in deficit-reducing revenue?
Well, first of all, they get about $20 billion from the Medicare cuts that I mentioned early. Although, let me caution you about that. They're not cutting beneficiaries. They are cutting doctors and hospitals. And a lot of people think that that may not turn out to be real to the economy, in the sense that when you push down on what Medicare pays doctors and hospitals, it tends to mean that the rest of us who have private insurance have to pay more. And so in a sense, it comes back and we pay it in a kind of a hidden tax.
Okay, so that's $20 billion. That would bring you up to about $43 billion.
Right.
How else do they make up the revenue?
Well, they eliminated the president's proposal for enterprise zones in the cities. You get another $5 billion or so by doing that. They also eliminated a couple of tax breaks that were put in there to help small businesses. The House had passed a proposal that would allow small businesses to write off up to $25,000 worth of spending a year, investment spending. They cut that back down to $10,000, which is current law. There was another proposal that allowed a special tax break for investors who put their money into small businesses. That's been eliminated. And the third thing they did was to cut back on some of the tax breaks provided for the poor, on the theory that since you weren't going to have such a big energy tax, the burden on the poor wasn't going to be as big, and therefore you didn't have to give them as large a tax break as President Clinton had.
Have they not also delayed the onset of the higher tax rates for higher income Americans?
In effect, they've delayed it to the middle of the year. What that really means is that in the current year, the increase in the tax rates will only be about half as big as the president proposed.
And I saw on the wires a surcharge on capital gains for people over a certain income level?
That's right. That's a surprise. The president's plan had a surcharge on incomes over, I believe it's about $250,000 a year, and what the Senate did was extend that surcharge to capital gains income, the income you get from selling securities, real estate, so forth.
We just heard President Clinton repeat what he's been saying, that one of his criteria is that it must result in about $500 billion in deficit reduction. Are they going to achieve that in this version?
Certainly on paper, they are going to achieve the $500 billion goal. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people question the Medicare cuts, whether those are in fact real. And the deficit reduction you get from the energy tax over the long term won't be as great as it would have been in the president's proposal. But yes, they will, on paper, be able to say they've got $500 billion worth of deficit cuts over the next 5 years.
Now, you've heard the president frequently in the last few days go through the list of what he calls his principles, that this deal, which he allowed them to make and stood back from, would have to meet. Does it meet them, in your view?
I think it pretty much meets the president's principles. It certainly deals with the fairness concern that he's expressed over and over again about tax rates and tax rates on the wealthy. The one place where it may cause some problems is it doesn't have the incentives for small business and for investment.
Which he emphasized again yesterday.
That's
in his
right.
press conference.
That's right. And I think that may be where it causes some problem. But remember, this not only has to move through the Senate, it then goes to a conference committee where differences with the House of Representatives will have to be worked out.
Right. Now, let's go back to the full Senate for a moment, though. Suppose the Senate Finance Committee votes on this tomorrow or Friday, and it goes through. The Republicans presumably all oppose it, or do any of the Republicans who lined up, like Cohen, who lined up with Senator Boren a few weeks ago, will any of them break ranks and go for this, do you think?
My guess is that there will be no Republican votes for this, either in the committee or on the floor of the Senate.
Okay. Now, on the floor of the Senate, are the objections from Democrats going to be substantial, and could they destroy the majority for the bill there?
Oh, I think they could. I think you're going to see a couple of weeks of very difficult debate on the floor of the Senate. When you look at how difficult it was just to get these members of the Senate Finance Committee to agree to a plan. I mean, they've been fighting over this for 5 days, and it's still a very fragile compromise. It's hard to believe that there aren't going to be some huge fights and probably some major changes on the floor of the Senate.
Where will the principal objections come from on the floor of the Senate, do you think?
I think the Medicare cuts are going to cause real problems among the liberals. And you still have a lot of groups, even though the energy tax is much smaller, you have a lot of groups saying that it's all the more unfair because the whole notion of shared sacrifice, everybody has to pay a piece of this, is gone. And so those who are left paying the tax, the Trucking Association, for instance, people who drive cars, people from western states who have to drive long distances to get anywhere, those people are now more adamant about killing this tax or getting exempted from it somehow. So I don't think the fight over the energy tax is over.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's looking a bit far ahead now, but given the unhappiness, particularly of Democratic liberals in the House, we just heard the chairman of the Black Caucus address this issue. What would you say would be the fate of the bill there in the conference to come?
It's going to be a very difficult line to walk. The liberals in the House of Representatives are definitely going to want to see those Medicare cuts scaled back, and they're probably going to want to see a bigger energy tax. On the other hand, if you increase the energy tax, you may run into problems again when you go back to the Senate. So it's not going to be an easy package to put together, and we may see it change several times before it becomes law.
Would you, if this move in the Finance Committee might be said to represent the influence of conservatives in the party who've modified it, who said it was too liberal a thing, will the effect of going back to the House bring it back, will that be a more liberal influence in the House and modify it that way again?
I think that would be the best guess. I think to get final passage of this bill, it's going to have to move back a little bit in, as you say, the liberal direction, in the sense that they have to cut back on the Medicare cuts and probably put a little bit more energy tax.
So in other words, if there's been a swing to the right to get the agreement in the Finance Committee, there may be a bit of a swing back to the left before the final bill is passed.
I think that's right, although you really have to look at this as much in regional terms as you do in ideological terms.
Right.
I mean, it was oil state senators who were really driving this process away from the energy tax. Oil state senators have much more influence in the Senate than they do in the House of Representatives, oil state representatives.
Right.
So I think that's where the difference comes.
Well, Alan Murray, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Rob.
Next tonight, are cans of Pepsi-Cola being tampered with, or is PepsiCo the victim of a hoax? The Food and Drug Administration has launched a nationwide investigation into reports that hypodermic needles and syringes have been found in Pepsi cans around the country. The first claim of tampering surfaced last Wednesday in Tacoma, Washington. Since then, dozens of people in more than 20 states have reported finding syringes and needles in their Pepsi cans. One man in St. Charles, Missouri claimed he found a syringe in a can of Diet Pepsi he bought at this gas station.
I walked right outside the store, and I opened it up and was walking to my car, and there was a really bad smell, bad taste, and that was basically it.
A burning in your throat?
Oh, yes, and it's still, I'm being treated right now still for it.
So far, there have been no reports of serious injuries. The cans came from various Pepsi plants across the country. Some were bottled 6 months ago, some a week ago. Federal officials said the cases appear unrelated and that many could be hoaxes. Already, one Pennsylvania man has been arrested on charges of making a false report. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Pepsi officials claim it is virtually impossible for tampering to occur at the bottling plants. The company's highly mechanized system produces about 30 million cans a day. During the process, the cans are turned upside down, blasted with hot air and water, then flipped up to be filled and sealed. The whole operation takes just a few seconds. For more on this, we turn to Craig Weatherup, who's the president and chief executive officer of Pepsi-Cola North America. Mr. Weatherup, I think in the interest of full disclosure, I might point out that this broadcast is partially funded by Pepsi-Cola, but that the interview is totally independent from that relationship. It's a pleasure to talk to you. My first question is, today on the Reuters Newswire, the story began, PepsiCo battled a potential public relations disaster. Is that what you're battling tonight?
Well, I certainly think we're dealing with something that could be characterized that way. We hope, obviously, that the end result is not a disaster, but as of right now, we are very frustrated by our ability to make progress and to come to a resolution that is something that the American public understands and feels comfortable with, and we obviously are very, very frustrated in our ability to reach a successful conclusion to this.
What is it that's frustrating you?
Well, I think the evidence we have to date certainly is relatively conclusive that nothing is coming out of a manufacturing facility. You couple that with the fact that we have a tamper-proof container that is not something that can be tampered with, and none of the cans that have been turned in indeed have any reflection of tampering. So if it's not coming out of our manufacturing facilities and the cans are not being tampered with, then the only conclusion that you can come to is that something is happening after the can is opened, and hence the problem.
And what is it that's happening after the can has been opened?
Well, that's exactly what we don't know. I mean, you can...
What do you suspect?
You can only surmise that either by accident or by design, something is being placed into the can.
And by design, what would cause someone to deliberately to put something into the can? Why would they do that?
Well, I'm not a lawyer or certainly a psychiatrist, but the explanations I've been advised of and I've heard the FDA commissioner comment on is either to do with monetary gain, extortion, if you will, or just publicity, or just someone who obviously have some sort of personal difficulty to deal with.
Yesterday, as I understand it, your company tended to play the story low-key, but today, you and your executives were visible on most of the television talk shows. What happened between yesterday and today that caused you to go so aggressively public with this story?
Well, basically what happened was Monday night was the point in time where we were dealt with or had to deal with a national program, a national event. Up until then, it had been an incident in Seattle, and it was a local affair being examined locally. Monday night, when it became a national event, I talked to the commissioner of the FDA, and we agreed that the best approach was to go forward and try to share the facts that we had with the public at large, talk to people like yourself in the media, and to share what was indeed apparent to us and the facts that we had. And we've spent since yesterday morning, since right now, working on doing exactly that.
Has your company and have the investigators for the FDA been able in the time that's elapsed to check out thoroughly each of these 20, 25 reports of tampering?
Yes, we have. We've basically we've shared the data that we have with the FDA. The FDA has obviously the names, the addresses, the cans, the syringes in their possession, and at this point in time what they are actually doing is completing these investigations. As you know, they arrested an individual last night, right. And at this point in time they are pursuing each of these other incidences with their legal staff.
But as of this evening, there is not yet one confirmed case of tampering. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's nothing to suggest or to confirm that that this has happened.
One of your spokesmen said the other day that there has not been a single case of an unopened can containing a syringe or a needle. That statement confused me because, I mean, how do you know that there's not one in there until you do open it?
Well, obviously you don't. I mean, you're correct. That's exactly correct. What we can surmise is if there was a foreign object in this can, that you would be able to shake the can or possibly hear this object and bring it to our attention. It may not be something that's likely to happen, but we would hope with the number of instances we've had that we would find something in an unopened can. That's something we're trying to find, and that would allow us to explain and try to analyze what is happening with these incidences.
The Food and Drug Administration, Mr. Weatherup, has said that no recall of Pepsi products is warranted. Why isn't it?
Well, at this stage of the game, we have no facts, no way to identify what is the action that we should be taking. That's really what our frustration is. At this stage, all the evidence is pointing to the fact that we have cans that are showing up in one part of the country, another part of the country, something that was done months ago to weeks ago. Each and every can has a date and a location stamped on it, so there is nothing to suggest that these were produced in the same plant at the same time in any kind of sequence. So there's no pattern, and the FDA and ourselves have concluded that we don't know what action to take, and other than trying to find a pattern, there is none, and we're basically at the point of trying to just get the investigations done with the individuals.
The FDA's advice was if you buy Pepsi-Cola, and you should go ahead and do it, they say, make sure you, instead of drinking it out of the can, pour it in a glass. What advice do you give your customers?
Yes, that is exactly what we have said as well, that if somebody has a genuine question and a concern, to take the product, pour it in a glass, and drink it. And I would make the point again that this is an issue where there's no injury involved, there's no health risk, there's no issue here of personal injury. Unfortunately, it's syringes, not golf balls, and therefore you have a very unpleasant thought and an unpleasant problem.
I read the stock market that Pepsi-Cola stock was down 25 cents on Monday, down 63 cents yesterday, down 10 or 12 cents today. What's been the effect on sales of your product?
At this point in time, I really don't know. I certainly surmise that there is a negative impact. I don't have data for the last 48 hours since this incident has become so public, but certainly it is not something that's favorable to us. My only hope is that I may be Pollyannish, but my belief is that people recognize this for what it is. Most people in this country are kind of tired of being held hostage to these kinds of things, and that people will look at the facts and be fair, and that's all we can expect.
My last question is to ask you about the corporate experience of dealing with the hoax. Is it better to talk it to death or to ignore it? I know the FDA has mixed feelings about what to do.
I guess our point is we have a 97-year-old trademark. We have 50,000 people who are employed in trying to make sure this is the highest quality product in America. To not talk about it would be a terrible disservice to our employees, our product, and most importantly, our consumers. So we think we have to share everything we know, not only with the FDA, but with the American public, and let them know we take this obviously incredibly seriously, and just feel terribly frustrated in terms of the fact that we don't have a conclusive way to guarantee what exactly is happening. I do anticipate there will be some more arrests, and I think that will help bring some clarity to what's happening.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weatherup, very much.
Thank you.
Robin?
Still ahead, changes in the workforce and the U.S. and Russia. We turn next tonight to the new shape of the American workforce. Companies are increasingly hiring part-time, unbenefited workers in an effort to become more competitive. Correspondent Jeffrey Kay of public station KCET Los Angeles looks at the cost to workers and to business.
No, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
These union members are fighting to save their well-paying full-time jobs. They work in United Airlines' Los Angeles kitchen. But because United is losing money, the airline is selling off its kitchens. The work done by these employees would be contracted out to people earning lower wages. And if they sell the flight kitchen, what will you do?
I'd go out back to Vegas and try to find another job. I couldn't work here for $5 an hour or any place else.
What are you making now?
$17 an hour.
It's kind of hard to find $17 an hour jobs now, isn't it?
Yes.
Another airline, US Air, has also cut costs by trimming its payroll. They did it by using more part-timers. Sherry Matus, a baggage handler in San Diego, lost her full-time job with US Air in 1990. 6 months later, she was hired back, but as a part-timer. Now she works half the hours and receives fewer medical benefits.
And I've been permanent temporary or permanent part-time ever since then. But that really doesn't hold any water. You could still go at any time.
What do you mean you could go at any time?
Well, I could get laid off again, depending on how many flights that they're going to have into San Diego. We have contracts with other airlines that we handle, and if we lose those contracts, then again, we're out of work. My seniority is not very high. 15 years isn't very high in San Diego.
White-collar workers are also affected by changing hiring practices. At Apple Computer in Cupertino, California, as many as 20% of the workers are temporary. That means that although they may work full-time, they are hired by the project and can be laid off when the assignment is done. Among the independent contractors is Dan Farrow, who produces multimedia software.
I was here doing work when there were major layoffs. I said, what's going to happen to this project? And one of the guys said, look around you. Who's doing the work? It was all contractors when the company was downsizing.
These individual stories are part of a revolutionary change taking place in the American workforce. Call it the temping of America. Companies like Apple Computers are making increasing use of part-time and temporary workers. That way, they can better control the bottom line. But for many American workers, job security has become an old-fashioned concept. Meaningful statistics are hard to come by, but what's apparent is that more and more workers are becoming disposable. Companies like Apple often meet their short-term needs by hiring through temporary agencies. The number of temp industry workers more than tripled between 1982 and 1992, as cost-conscious businesses sought to avoid using union workers and making long-term commitments to employees. Companies also save the costs of payroll taxes and benefits such as health insurance and retirement funds. Businesses gain flexibility by using what is known as a core and ring arrangement. Apple Computer, for example, retains a core of workers who are more or less permanent. The ring workers come and go on a temporary or part-time basis, according to the company's needs. This helps Apple, which is in a particularly competitive and volatile field.
We've had a philosophy within the company going many years in the past around fewer people are better than more people.
Kevin Sullivan is Apple's Senior Vice President for Human Resources.
So we've done that both in subcontracting quite a bit of work, and we've brought people into the company in temporary contractor capabilities to help us in areas where they had specialties.
For US Air, cutting 6,500 jobs over 3 years helped the company finally turn a profit early this year. Still, for survivors like Matus, there is the ever-present fear of a pink slip. Matus, who is a single mother, now has an erratic income with her part-time job. So she hasn't been able to take advantage of lower interest rates and get a bank to refinance her mortgage. Her father has had to move in to help with the expenses and care for her son. Although she understands US Air's problems, still she must deal with the same insecurity that has frayed her co-workers' nerves.
Sometimes there's a lot of anger, especially in the break room. There's a lot of tension and fighting amongst the employees because they can't fight with the company, so there's a lot of anger amongst each other, and you can tell when things are going to come to blow, and the men want to fight, and I just kind of go off into my own private locker room and don't want to be part of it.
But you attribute this to the changes that have taken place?
Yeah, absolutely, because every time that there's a major announcement made about layoffs or cutbacks in stations or cities, that's when things get heated up and people get angry.
Ollie Lawrence Jr., U.S. Air's vice president for employee communications, feels the company's profitability has reduced workers' tensions.
Well, I believe that might have been prevalent 2 years ago when we first initially gone through the restructuring. But I believe our employees believe or feel a lot more secure today with the business than they might have when they saw us going through the necessary restructuring.
Because of the nationwide restructuring of workforces, many employees feel they're on a roller coaster. Some enjoy the flexibility. Others find the ride a little scary. Pharaoh, for instance, lives with his wife in Iowa. He does some work at home, but he spends up to 18 weeks a year in Northern California developing programs for Apple. Pharaoh enjoys the arrangement, but says there's a downside.
The emotional aspect of rags to riches, you know, you're working, you're making money, you're doing fine, you're not working, you're broke, you're wondering if you're ever going to work again. That's, I think, the hardest part. But for me, the way we've gotten around is my wife has a full-time job, she's a professor, and that has provided continuity for us in terms of a steady income. But looking at Apple and looking at other companies today that are laying people off left and right, I at least know I do not have job security. The employees at large corporations today think they have job security, but they don't.
For many, the lack of job security provides small incentive for company loyalty. Apple's Sullivan acknowledges that the financial benefits of hiring temporary workers may be offset by employing people with little stake in the company's future.
That's the thing that I worry about, is what are the things that we should be building into our organization that give us the competitive edge in the future. And sometimes if you don't pay attention to that, you can take the convenient road of just going out and taking people, bringing them in and saying, you take care of it, when in reality what you should be doing is building that knowledge and expertise within the company on a permanent basis.
As the number of permanent jobs dries up, workers must change their employment goals and expectations. That's the view of Mitchell Marks, an organizational psychologist. Marks has consulted with major firms including AT&T, Ford, and Citibank.
You no longer have womb-to-tomb employment, where the company brought you in out of school or out of the armed forces, like it used to be, and trained you, put you through the management training program or the technical training program, promoted you, took care of you, had a very paternalistic relationship with the employee. Today, the organization is saying, look, if you've got the right skills, I'll bring you in, I'll use you, but the time will come where I say goodbye to you, and you're on your own.
Confronted with this new reality, what should workers do? That was the question faced last fall by employees of Tandon, a computer company based in a Los Angeles suburb. When the company slid towards bankruptcy, John Porter lost his job testing computers and signed up at a temporary agency. Porter was quickly placed with Ventura County Cablevision, where he is now developing a computer database. Porter earns a good salary and likes his work, but he receives no benefits and is resigned to taking a succession of temporary jobs, if he has to.
I have every expectation that I will find a place to work and that hopefully the company will do good. It's also possible that the next company that I work for could go under, but I think there'll be another company after that and another one after that. I think it's an attitude. Mm-hmm. If I'm willing to persevere and stay active in my career, then I think there's work to be found.
Porter is luckier than most because a federally funded program is paying for his retraining. Porter is learning in a UCLA extension course how to program computer networks. He believes this skill should make him more attractive to future employers. Porter's pragmatic attitude is shared by his classmates.
And I'm curious, first of all, how many people here have been laid off and are being retrained or training for more? Wow. Most of the people here most of you have been laid off.
Just about everyone in this class had been laid off from aerospace or computer companies. They say their experiences opened their eyes to the new reality of the American workplace, where long-term employment is becoming increasingly rare.
Do you expect to go through many more employers?
Oh, at least a half a dozen.
Half a dozen?
At least, because that's the only way you can, as an individual, can make the money that you feel you deserve. Because an employer is going to pay you as little as possible because of their reasons. And this way, if you do move around, you may gain more competitive knowledge that a new employer would find valuable?
There's just no loyalty concepts to your company. You do what's best for you and professionally right for the company, but you can't expect to be there for more probably than, I don't know, a good few years, 3 to 4 years maximum. That's my expectation.
In response to this fundamental change in employer-employee relations, many workers are having to develop a new survival mentality. Farrow believes that because his survival depends on his marketability, his first loyalty must be to himself rather than to any one company.
That's an interesting opposite side to the employment rub. If I'm in control of my life and building my skills all the time, I know I'm the guy who has to go out and find the next job, and I can do it. But if I'm resting on my laurels, so to speak, working in a company secure that they're going to do everything right, and they don't, then I'm dead.
As companies return to profitability, some are having second thoughts about depending on workers loyal only to themselves. In fact, some companies are cutting back on their use of temporary employees, opting instead for a more stable workforce. But with many businesses still struggling to remain viable in a sluggish economy, for many workers, the temping of America looms as an unpleasant reality.
Finally tonight, we turn to the fragmented former Soviet Union. What was an imperial superpower only 2 years ago has split into 15 separate nations, many embroiled in civil wars and sometimes bloody conflicts with each other. In Russia, President Yeltsin is fighting for political and economic reform. President Clinton has thrown his political support behind Yeltsin. In Ukraine, there's internal political turmoil and controversy over ratifying the arms treaty to get rid of Soviet nuclear missiles deployed there. In Armenia and Azerbaijan, more than 5,000 people have been killed in battles over territory. And in Azerbaijan, an old-line communist has forced his way back to power. In Georgia, there's civil and territorial war that has brought it close to fighting with Russia. And in the Central Asian Republic of Tajikistan, Islamic fundamentalists and communists are struggling for power. Today, the House of Representatives approved President Clinton's request for more aid to Russia and the republics. The man he's put in charge of this complicated menu as Ambassador-at-Large and Special Advisor to the Secretary of State on the newly independent states is Strobe Talbot. He's a veteran journalist and author and has known the president since they were both Rhodes Scholars at Oxford 25 years ago. He joins us tonight from the State Department. Ambassador Talbot, thank you for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Robin.
President Yeltsin won a victory today in his convention for a new constitution. What importance does the administration place on that?
Considerable importance. The important thing here, I think, Robin, is that there is an overall trend in Russian politics. It's a complicated process there. We've not commented on every single development as they've occurred, but we have observed and welcomed the overall movement in the general direction of consolidating democracy. And I think what you've seen today is further evidence that the momentum is moving in the right direction.
I mean, the parts that are significant in today's victory, in this sort of outline of a new constitution, are what? The right to own private property?
And more generally, the movement towards a post-Soviet constitution. One of the many anomalies of this whole situation that we've had in Russia over the past year and a half is that this new post-communist state has been operating under a Brezhnev-era constitution. And President Yeltsin has been determined to replace that old constitution with a new one.
Does this mean that the threats which were seemed so dire to his leadership only a few months ago, that he's now safely put all that behind him, would you say?
I wouldn't use the word safe or safely in the context of Russian politics. It's going to be an up and down affair for a long time to come. One of the points that our government, I think, must continually to impress both on our own people and also on the Russian people is that we're in this for the long haul. And we realize it's going to be a long haul. There are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be zigs and zags on the road to the full flowering of democracy in that country. But we're going to stay with the Russian reformers. And I think that what we've seen already, just in the course of a couple of months, has been very encouraging. As you indicate in the way you pose the question, things look much less dire than they did back, say, on March 20th, when President Yeltsin felt it necessary to throw down the gauntlet to the Russian parliament. He's come a long way since then, and so has the overall process of democratization.
President Clinton recently and your boss, the Secretary of State, are claiming Russia as a major foreign policy achievement of this administration. What role do you think the U.S. did the U.S. play in Yeltsin's victory today?
Well, President Clinton and Secretary Christopher have good reason, I think, to be proud of the policy that they have set for this country. At the same time, one point that they have been the first to make, and that I would reiterate here, is that in the final analysis, it's up to the Russian people themselves to make sure that this extraordinary transformation that is taking over their country prevails. They are doing something that would be impressive even if it were just in one area, such as economic reform. It would be impressive even if it were just in the area of political reform, that is, moving away from a totalitarian dictatorship towards a democracy. It would be impressive if it were simply the evolution from an empire to a modern nation state. But in fact, what they are doing is all three of those things at once. And while, as you indicated at the outset of this segment of the program, there are many, many troubles associated with this transformation, troubles both in Russia itself and around the periphery of Russia, they have also accomplished a great deal. And what we have done, I think, the Clinton administration, is to make clear from the very outset of the administration that we are firmly behind that process of reform and that we're going to stick with it. And I think that the support that we gave to President Yeltsin and his reform policies at the outset of the administration did make a difference at a critical time, namely at a moment of crisis between President Yeltsin and the conservatives in the parliament. And I might say that the Russian leaders themselves, including President Yeltsin, have acknowledged that on several occasions.
And apparently the House of Representatives has bought that argument today in approving the foreign aid bill.
And one of the gratifying things there, Robin, is that the support has been genuinely bipartisan. I've spent a good deal of time myself. Secretary Christopher has spent a great deal of time talking to legislators on Capitol Hill, and we have been very gratified at the extent of support this has among Republicans as well as Democrats.
Will it be as easy in the Senate, as plain sailing in the Senate?
We spent a lot of time with members of the Senate in anticipation of the deliberations that they will be having on these programs very shortly, and I think we have strong bipartisan support there as well.
I just wonder what the U.S. gets in the way of influence in this, just on one particular point. By gambling on Yeltsin's success and winning, you'd think that President Clinton's influence with Moscow should be at a peak, and yet obviously it did no good over Bosnia. The President, Secretary of State went to the Russians hoping to get support for the U.S. initiatives in Bosnia and was turned down.
Robin, I simply wouldn't characterize it that way. I accompanied Secretary Christopher on his trip to Moscow when he was sent by President Clinton to discuss the problem of how the international community should react to the tragedy and horror of what's happening in the former Yugoslavia. And while it's true there were differences between the United States and Russia, as indeed there were differences between the United States and other very close traditional allies, there was also a larger point to be made about that whole exercise. And that was that American and Russian diplomats, and indeed American and Russian generals, sat down with each other across the table, and they put their heads together and tried to come up with a satisfactory set of answers to one of the most vexing problems of our time. There was absolutely no whiff of the kind of point scoring, the kind of recrimination that went on during the Cold War. This was genuinely a post-Cold War dialogue between two diplomatic partners. And I think that in many ways it set the tone for dialogue and deliberation that will take place in the future over a whole range of regional conflicts and other issues where I think we will find common ground with the Russians. And indeed, we have found quite a bit of common ground with the Russians through the efforts of Secretary Christopher and Foreign Minister Kozyrev to work on the Yugoslav problem since that trip.
But they did turn down the U.S. initiatives on, for instance, lifting the arms embargo, on supplying troops, on joining the U.S. in the humanitarian airlift, on those various things.
Robin, the United States did not find enthusiastic universal support for those proposals anywhere among our allies in Western Europe, including countries with which we have had intimate strategic partnership for decades.
Let's turn to the part of the former USSR that you've just been intimately involved with, the Ukraine. It was assumed for a while after independence that they were going to fairly easily turn over the nuclear weapons located on their soil to Russia. Now they're balking. You and Defense Secretary Aspen have just been there to encourage them. What did you achieve?
Well, one thing I think we have been able to do in our discussions with the Ukrainians, including during Secretary Aspen's recent visit there, is to clarify for the Ukrainians themselves what our objectives are here. I think we have convinced the Ukrainians with whom we've had a chance to talk that the United States has their security very much in mind, as well, of course, as the United States' own national interests in security. I think we have been able to lay to rest anxiety in some circles in Ukraine that the United States is ganging up with Russia or somebody else against Ukraine. I think that we have been able to make the point that it is in Ukraine's own interest, if it wants to have a full, rich, deep relationship with the United States and with the other countries of the world, that it keep its obligations under international agreements. It made a commitment in the so-called Lisbon Protocols to ratify the START I Treaty and to accede to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear weapons state. And one of the good things, and there were a number of good things about Secretary Aspen's visit to Kiev not long ago, was that every single one of the executive branch leaders that we met with in Ukraine reiterated the Ukrainian government's determination to keep that commitment. Now, of course, one of the complicating factors that we have in the disintegration of the old Soviet empire is that one giant dictatorial system has collapsed and been replaced, as you said, by 15 new independent states, many of which are well on the way to democratization. And that means, among other things, that quite a number of them have parliaments that do not see eye to eye with the executive branch. And it is certainly true that in the Ukrainian parliament, there is a lot of skepticism about whether it is wise for Ukraine to give up its, the Soviet nuclear weapons on its territory, or at least to do so right away.
There's even, there are people, some Americans are beginning to argue that it would be better for them to keep them. For instance, John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago in the current Foreign Affairs magazine is arguing that it is imperative to maintain peace between the Ukraine and Russia. The only defense the Ukraine would have against potential Russian aggression.
Well, the only thing that matches my general respect for him, and I do respect him and have followed him for years, is my profound disagreement with him on this point. I think that the course that he is advocating for Ukraine would be disastrous for Ukraine. Moreover, it would call into question the survival of the strategic arms regime, strategic arms reduction regime that we have put in place over the last quarter of a century. If Ukraine were not to ratify START I, there are very profound questions about whether Russia would ever ratify the START II treaty. Moreover, the global non-proliferation regime established by the Non-Proliferation Treaty would be in very real jeopardy. But getting back to Ukraine itself, the point that our administration has been making in its dialogue with the Ukrainians is that there are a number of factors that will ensure its security over the long run. A very important factor is good relations with Russia. And if Ukraine does not follow through on its obligations under the Lisbon Protocols and keeps these nuclear weapons, it will have exactly the opposite effect.
Is it important enough to the United States not only to compensate the Ukraine for the cost of the weapons or paying them for their share of whatever plutonium might be in the weapons, but actually to offer some kind of U.S. guarantee of Ukrainian security against Russia or from Russia?
Not if by that you mean entering into some formal treaty, analogous, for example, to the NATO treaty that binds us to our allies in Western Europe. However, there are a variety of bilateral and multilateral agreements and understandings, which I think can have a mutually reinforcing effect and sort of serve as underpinnings for Ukraine's security. But what Ukraine really needs for its security, in addition to its continued development as a democratic country, and we hope a prosperous country, and a country with good relations with the United States, it needs to live in a safe neighborhood. It needs to have neighboring countries with whom it is on good terms.
Well, if we had another hour, we could go into the other 14 or 13 former republics. But for now, Ambassador Talbot, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Robin.
Again, the major stories of this Wednesday. Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee have tentatively agreed on an alternative to President Clinton's budget plan. The new plan would replace the president's broad energy tax with a 4.3 a gallon gas tax and would make deeper cuts in Medicare. And tonight, UN forces, again led by U.S. gunships, launched another attack against positions held by Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Roger. That's the NewsHour for tonight, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo.